Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here. I want to say good morning to everybody online. Thank you for sitting in with us. We know you could be doing a lot of other things right now. We're glad you took the time to be a part of what God's doing here. And I'm glad to get to be back. And, I don't really think of myself as a guest speaker anymore. I just feel like more like family and friends. So it's good to be home. It's good to be back and be a part of what God's doing here. And so this morning we're going to look at one of my favorite stories in the New Testament because the message within it will help all of us. So you weren't here last week. We're doing a two-part series called Encourage Me. And so we've been talking about encouragement. And without exception, almost every person I've talked to that I've mentioned we're doing, they're like, oh, I need that. I need to be encouraged. We all do. We all need it. And we got to get to a place where our encouragement is more than just a positive mental attitude, more than just trying to feel better and change our perspective. We have to dial in to the way God encourages us, right? And because that's the lasting encouragement. So anyway, to get started with, what we're going to read today really came out from me traveling a lot. As I traveled, I've discovered that there's a trend in our country, and the trend is that we live in a world of people that are clueless. Now, by show of hands, how many of you guys have friends that are clueless? Anybody? Married people pointing at each other, not good. And doing the overhead point, that's not Christian. And I thought it was just me. I thought, well, I'm from Oklahoma. That's maybe the capital of cluelessness. But I've traveled enough to realize we live in a world of people that don't get it, right? One of the first time, I didn't share this in the last gathering, but one of the first times I ever came here, I was staying at a hotel, and I have no sense of direction. And before I left to go to the hotel, I went to the front desk, and I said, hey, can you tell me how to get to First Baptist Indian Trails? And the guy behind the counter goes, from here? I'm like, no, from Oklahoma. I'll go back and start over. Yes, from here. He's like, you want to know the shortest way? I'm like, no, I've got time to kill. I'm sure they'll wait on me. Right? We live in a world of people who don't get it. So as I've traveled, I've built what I call an I don't get it file. So I just want to build a case that we really do live in a clueless world. This came from some random hotel that I stayed in, and it's directions on how to use a washing machine and the warning on it. I'm just going to read the warning. Warning. Do not add gasoline or explosives to your washing machine. I have to say that frightens me. The fact that that's in print means that somewhere has thought to themselves, I think dynamite would make a great fabric softener. No wonder my shirt's so soft, I've blown the back out of it. Right? It's everywhere you go. If you look for it, you'll find it. This came off a flight that I was on. So I didn't take the card, but I did get a copy of it. So this is the seat card that goes in all of the emergency row exits on a plane. All right. Now, I'm going to read the English part, but it's printed in 7 different languages, which is proof that cluelessness has gone global, kids. That's what that means. There's dumb people everywhere, right? But this is the card that goes in the seat pocket if you're sitting in an emergency row. I'm just going to read to you as it's written. This is meant to be read. All right, so here it is. Ready? For people who don't get it. Written by someone who also doesn't get it. Here we go. If you're sitting in an exit row and you cannot read this card, so long. All right, good luck with that. And all right. Here is an actual letter from the Department of Social Services from Greenville, South Carolina. So clueless also can be local. And all right, so I'm just going to read to you. It's written to an actual guy named Al Palanza. I'm just going to read it to you as it's written, and you tell me if you get it. So this is written to the guy. Dear Al Palanza, your food stamps will be stopped effective March 2020 because we received notice that you passed away. The letter continues. May God bless you, and you may reapply if there's a change in your circumstance. So when Jesus comes back, he gets to get his food stamps back, and that's the point of the letter. All right, so the point is that we live in a world of people that are clued out. Right now, there's a lot of different things that people can be clueless about. Washing machines, flying on a plane, writing letters to people that will never read it. Right? There's a lot of things that people can be clued out about. One of the most common things that people can be clueless about is what it really means to be clued in spiritually. It's possible, and this is kind of a wake-up call, it's possible to have been a good person, be in church, be around the things of God, and yet not be clued in spiritually. So this morning, I want to talk to us about how to go from being clued out spiritually to being clued in, because it's the clued in part where we find encouragement. You see it? So how do we make this move from just knowing God on a surface level or even in terms of what happens on the stage to really cluing into his presence? And this is what brings us to our text this morning, because in Mark chapter 8, if you got a Bible, Mark chapter 8, we're going to read a story that is seemingly an insignificant story. It's sandwiched between two incredible moments. It's sandwiched between the feeding the 5,000 and the transfiguration. And this is where most people find their life, between the provision of God and the presence of God. We're caught somewhere in between. We're caught in this place where we feel like we're not seeing God do all that we want him to do, that there's something we feel like we might be missing out on. And so we find ourselves caught in this place. And so it's in this place that Jesus has this conversation with the disciples. Now, let me give you a little background to it. So Jesus, before they get in the boat, he's been preaching all morning long to about 5,000 people, maybe more. He gets done preaching and he says to his disciples, hey, let's feed everybody. Did you all bring any food? And they're like, nope, we came with you, right? And so Jesus says, why don't you go find some? So the disciples scurry through the crowd. They find a few loaves of bread. They bring the bread back to Jesus. They place it in his hands and he begins to tear it. And as he tears the bread, it begins to multiply. And as it multiplies now, the disciples become the waiters in the story. They come to Jesus, take the bread out of his hands, and turn it around and serve it to all these 5,000 people. They keep repeating the process. Jesus takes a little, multiplies it. They take the bread. They serve it to all these people. They repeat the process until everybody is fed. And they pick up 12 baskets of leftovers. Everyone say 12. 12 baskets of leftover, right? Now, everyone has heard Jesus preach. They've all eaten. This is where we get the tradition of eating lunch after church, right? So this is where it came from, right here in Mark chapter 8, kids. And so they heard Jesus preach. They've had lunch. Now everyone goes home. The disciples get in the boat with Jesus. They push away from the shore. They're on their way to his next ministry stop. And this is where we pick up the conversation. And this is how we know that at least in this moment of time, these disciples were clueless. Now, they watched Jesus feed 5,000 people. They picked up 12 baskets of leftover. They now get in the boat to go to their next stop. And this is how the story opens. Ready? Verse 14, Mark chapter 8. Listen to it. This is how we know they don't get it. And the disciples. And they had forgotten to take bread and did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. These guys just picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. And between 12 of them, they bring one loaf. And they're freaking out about it. They're like, oh, I thought you got the bread. I got the boat. He got the anchor. He got the sail. You were supposed to get the bread. They're all freaking out about it. And Jesus begins talking to them to help them to clue in. We all got things that make us freak out. We all got things that make us break into major cases of worry. And in those moments, Jesus navigates the disciples' anxiety and their worry back to a place where they can recognize something very important. This is what we're going to do. So the question then this morning is, how does any of us, myself, any of us, go from being clued out to being clued in to the presence of God? Well, here we go. There's 3 points. Ready? Number one is that we have to listen to his warning. It's interesting that when Jesus warns these guys, he doesn't give them a whole bunch of warning. He doesn't counsel them about the fact they don't have enough bread. He warns them about one thing, and yet they ignore it. Now look at this. Ready? What's this? Look at this. Verse 14, and they forgot to take bread and did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. Verse 15, here's the warning. And he was giving them orders saying, watch out. You see it? That's a warning. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Now listen to verse 16. And they begin to discuss the fact with one another they had no bread. Like they don't even respond to any, like this is how it happened, right? The disciples are in the boat going, I thought you got the bread. I got the boat. He got the anchor. He got the sail. You were in charge of it. We thought you were in charge of the bread. And Jesus goes, gentlemen, look out. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And all the disciples look at Jesus and go, but I thought you got the bread. I got the boat. He got the anchor. They don't react to anything that he just said. You know why? They're not listening. They're not listening. In the midst of the worry and the weight, the things that press in on us, We have to listen to the warning of Jesus. You know what the warning is about? If you're taking notes or if you're taking notes at home, it's about relationship. It's about relationship. Our entire experience of Christianity is built on having an authentic relationship with Jesus. It's not built on theology. It's not built on doctrine. It's not built on history. It's built on us having an authentic, real encounter and experience of the presence of Jesus. And so while they're in the boat, they're going, well, we don't have enough bread. What are we going to do? And Jesus says, don't forget your relationship with me. That's what he's saying when he says, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. If you look at that verse, Jesus identifies two groups of people that both had a relationship with him, but neither relationship was real. He says, beware the leaven. That word leaven means poison, right? It means poison. He says, beware of the poison of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were professional do-gooders. These are the people that made up rules to keep, and when they ran out of rules, they made up more. During their time of influence, they literally added over 200 plus rules to the Old Testament. They just kept making up rules. Their whole experience with God was external. It was how they behaved, how they looked, and yet they had no heart connection to Jesus. There are times throughout the ministry of Jesus where the Pharisees would be in full-blown theological arguments with Jesus, arguing over the Sabbath and whether you can eat and wash your hands. They would be no further away from Jesus than I am from this pulpit, and they would have no idea who he was. And Jesus says to his guys, don't let your relationship with me be like a Pharisee, where we go through the motions, and the motions have no meaning, where it's just all religious. It's just stuff that we do. It's how we appear and what people think about us. He says, don't become like a Pharisee. Jesus himself said they were the hardest people they ever tried to work with, because the Pharisees appeared on the outside to have it all together, but on the inside, their heart wasn't in it. Jesus called them whitewashed tombs. They appeared to be pristine on the outside, super religious, highly moral, but no heart, no real connection with Jesus. And then Jesus says, beware of the poison of Herod. Herod was the king of culture. Herod always cared more about what people thought of him than anything else. For Herod, Jesus was something that was thrown into the mix of his life. Jesus was a distraction, something he had to deal with. And if he got irritated, he would just put Jesus away. And if he was curious, he would seek Jesus out. But Herod was the king of culture. And for Herod, he knew Jesus, but not in a personal way. He was a cultural Christian. In other words, he knew who Jesus was, but it never impacted the way Herod led or the way that he lived. It didn't have any impact. Jesus was just in the mix. And so when he warns us not to forget our relationship with him, he says, be careful that you don't drift into these two groups, that we don't become like a Pharisee where we go through the motions, but the motions don't have any meaning, or that we become like Herod where we know the stories and we know the songs, but it doesn't influence our life in any way. There's no real sense that he's the Lord over our life. Jesus is just something we've done because it's what everyone does in North Carolina. That's a cultural Christian. You see it? And so Jesus says, don't let your relationship drift into these two categories, because worry, anxiety, pressure will make you do it. Here's what happens to us. Anytime we get under pressure, we get preoccupied with an unmet need. That unmet need gets bigger and bigger till it's all we can think about. It takes up our emotional time and energy. And once an unmet need takes every space of your life up, most of us react out of panic and we just do whatever is best for the moment. Right? In this story, the fact the disciples have one loaf of bread represents the unmet need. Bread represents them not having enough to meet the needs. Right? The disciples can do the math. There's one loaf, there's 12 of them, and I'm sure they're thinking, now with Judas in the boat, we're not going to have any. Right? And so, they're all freaking out. And here's what we do. We focus on some area we don't have enough. We get preoccupied with that unmet need. It goes bigger and bigger until it's all we can think about. And in the heat of the moment, we take matters into our own hand and do whatever we think is best. And the first thing most people do in the face of an unmet need is they push Jesus to the back. They push him to the background. The Pharisees pushed Jesus to the background. Herod pushed Jesus to the background. We have an unmet need. We get preoccupied by that unmet need. It gets bigger and bigger. So it's all we can think about. And what we do is we put our relationship with Jesus on hold. You're like, yes, I believe in Jesus. Yes, I know the Christmas story and the Easter story. And yes, I've read the Bible. I haven't understood. But I'm under pressure, and I just got to do what is best for right now. And we push our relationship with Jesus to the back, and we do whatever seems best. And this is how people make a bad situation even worse. I grew up, my mom is watching today from Oklahoma City. That's where I'm originally from. And so I grew up for me, when I was growing up in Oklahoma City, Saturdays were errand day for me and my mom. I would run errands with her on Saturday. And of course, she was driving, and I'd get in the front seat, and we're driving to the store. And as we're driving to the store, some random, like a rodent or a cat or something, would dart out in front of the car, and my mom would slam on the brake. And to save my life, anybody know what she would do? Anybody? Just show me if you know it. Look, regardless of age or stage, everyone knows this right here, right? 100% response. This is the first passenger side airbag. That's what that was, right? There was no helmets or knee pads. It was just mom's arm. That's all there was. My mom coached girls field hockey for 37 years, so she was always in shape. And so she would mash on that brake and swing her arm across me like, I was like, well, I didn't fly through the windshield, but you caved my chest cavity in. Thank you. And, well, this is what happens, ready? We have an unmet need. We get preoccupied with an unmet need. We take matters into our own hands. We push Jesus to the back. We start taking unnecessary risks. We complicate a bad situation and make it even worse by just trying to think our way through it naturally. And the Spirit of God sends someone through your life to throw his arm out across you to say, don't forget your relationship. You're drifting too far away. Don't forget your relationship with Jesus. He may send a friend across your path, a family member, some random guy in a light green shirt, let's just say. He sends someone through your path to throw his arm out across, and don't become like a Pharisee. Don't end up like Herod. Don't forget your relationship. But somebody who doesn't listen to the warning pushes that arm aside and goes, I got it. I got it. And I just wondered this morning, church, if we have anybody that the unmet needs are getting the best of you, and you push Jesus to the back and you drifted into one of these groups. And the Spirit of God is saying, don't forget. You don't need to go any further. Don't forget your relationship. To all the students in the house, your relationship with Jesus. Have you given your life to him? To all the adults in the house, has there been a moment where you've known his peace and his presence? Not just rules in a book, not just a story as part of a culture, but to know him personally. The warning of Jesus is, in the midst of our unmet needs, don't forget your relationship. And then number two, the second thing that he says, right? Not only to listen to the warning of Jesus, but then number two, to let go of worry. That's much easier to preach than it is to do, I know, right? But look at this. Now, watch what happens. So, verse 16, look at it. They begin to discuss the fact with one another they had no bread, right? They totally disregard what Jesus is saying. They don't respond to it. They don't go, what do you mean by this? Now look at verse 17. And Jesus, aware of this, aware of what? The fact that they're freaking out about the fact they have no bread. They're in the boat going, we got a lot of us and we have a little bit of resource and we can't go back and get the leftovers. They're on the shore. What are we going to do? Right? And the good news is, right, Jesus doesn't grow impatient with it, but he is amazed. I mean, look at this. Look what he says. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? He was like, guys, why is this a deal? Why is this an issue? Right? We all got stuff that makes this what I call the freak out factor. It makes us, we look at something in our life and we freak out. What am I going to do? Where's our next meal going to come from? How am I going to keep my marriage together? How's this going to work out? We put our mind into overdrive. Let me give you a definition for worry. Worry is trying to solve our problems our way without factoring in the help of God. That's what it is. Worry is when we try to solve our problems our way without factoring in the help of God. And the disciples are talking amongst themselves. There's no part of the story where they ever address Jesus. They're talking to each other. What are we going to do? How are we going to work this out? Right? Worry is trying to figure out how I'm going to meet my needs my way without factoring in the help of God. What are we going to do? How are we going to work this out? And look at Jesus' response. And Jesus, aware of this, said, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Why is this an issue? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? He's trying to get them to clue in. Right? He's asking these questions to get them to connect the dots. Here's the irony of this story. Ready? The irony of this story is that the disciples are in the boat worrying about the fact that they have no bread while they're in the boat with the bread of life. They're worried about the fact they have no bread while they're in the boat with the bread of life. And Jesus is saying, guys, why is this an issue? Right? The source is with you. Why is this a problem? Do you not yet understand? Do you not yet see? He's trying to get these guys to clue in. And I got on a plane and came here this morning to tell you that Jesus is in your boat. Whatever you're facing, Jesus is in your boat. The boat is symbolic of our life. The bread is the unmet needs. Our boat is our life. And Jesus is in the boat with you. The marriage that you're trying to save from being ripped apart at the seams, Jesus is in that boat. Your work situation that it becomes exponentially more difficult, Jesus is in that boat. If you've got a lot of kids, you've only had 4 hours of sleep for the whole week, Jesus is in that boat. If you cried in private to an Adele song, Jesus is in that boat with you. He's in your boat. In your relationship, in your finances, in your sickness, in your loss, Jesus is in the boat. And that's got to go off on the inside of us. To say, Jesus, I haven't always recognized it, but I know you're in the boat. But isn't the problem with all of us, myself included, is that we act like Jesus is not in the boat? Don't we? The disciples aren't talking to him. They're talking to themselves. They're talking to each other. Isn't this what we do? Right? We agreed, I believe in the Bible. Oh, yeah, I'm all for the story of Jesus. And yet we live like he's not in the boat. We look at our situation and go, what am I going to do about this? How am I going to work this out? Whatever I think is best is what I'm going to do. And haven't we steered our boat for too long? Haven't we like, I got it, and we keep steering our boat, we keep steering our vessel. You're like, God, I got it. And Jesus is like, I'm in the boat with you. And we keep rowing and we keep navigating and we run our boat right up to the rocks of reality and it shatters on impact. And all the while, Jesus has been in the boat. This is why he's saying, guys, I don't know why you're discussing this because I'm in the boat with you. And for you to know, if that's all you get out of today, that Jesus is in the boat, how would that change this week for you? How would you live differently back in your home where there's a lot of tension? If you walked back the front door of your house today going, Jesus, you're in this with me. How would this change how you go to school? If you walk down the hallways and you're just like, I know these people normally bother me. I'm concerned about what everyone thinks, but Jesus, you're in the boat with me. What would this do to the way you treat other people or how you go to work or how you see your work environment if you just had to preach it to yourself? Jesus, I thank you that you're in the boat with me, that you haven't left me, that you're in the boat with me. And Jesus is leading his guys to recognize who's in the boat with them. Jesus is in your boat. And the only way to let go of worry is to realize he's with you in this journey. And maybe the best thing some of us could do this morning would be to turn the ownership of our boat over to Jesus. That we would say, I've tried to steer my own vessel. I've tried to be the captain of my own ship. And I got off course along the way. I drifted into these groups that know about you but don't know you. And Jesus, I need you to step into my boat. I wonder if we got some men in the house that need to ask Jesus to step out of heaven and to step into the boat. I wonder if we got some ladies and some students that maybe you've only known Jesus in a religious way, in a cultural way. And maybe this morning you just need to say, I need Jesus. I need to experience the reality of him being in my boat. You see it? The way we go from being clued out to being included is to listen to the warning. The warning is don't forget relationship. To let go of worry, the only way we can let go of worry is by recognizing and realizing that Jesus is in the boat with us. And then finally, number 3, is that we have to look at the work of God. We have to look at the work of God. And so this is interesting, that Jesus doesn't lose his cool with these guys. He doesn't kick them out of the boat. He doesn't say, I can't believe you guys don't get this. He doesn't say, some of these guys are going to write part of the Bible. These guys are going to start the church, and they're like, oh, we just have one bread. One piece of bread. What are we going to do? And Jesus doesn't kick them out of the boat. He doesn't say, that's it. All y'all get out of the boat, swim back to the shore. Better yet, you guys stay here. I'll walk on ahead. Right? It's not there, right? He doesn't do that. Instead, he gives them a lesson. Now, how many, just by show, I'm not trying to out anybody, but how many people in your lifetime have ever not done well on a test? I don't want to say failed, but you just haven't done well, right? Has anybody ever failed a test more than once? Anybody? That's my fan base right there. Anybody ever make up answers on a test? Like you just made up stuff? I did it all the time. I got history questions like, when was the Ice Age? I just put in the winter. And I was terrible at biology. I'd get these questions on a test like, name something commonly found in a cell. And I just put prisoners. And I was like, at least give me a half a point for creativity, right? I was terrible at math. Anybody bad at math? Anybody? Yeah. Anybody have math word problems? The math story problems? How many of y'all know what I'm talking about? Like these long stories, you're supposed to figure out, some numerical answer. And like with my ADD, I couldn't stay with the story long enough to finish it. Like I would just halfway into it, I'd make up an answer. There were always, questions like, if Bill gets on a train going 17 miles an hour, I would quit right there. I was quit. I would just write down, Bill wouldn't tell me where he was going. It would be rude to ask. Who wants to ride the train and only go 17 miles an hour? What a dumb ride that would be. It was terrible. It was so terrible. Okay, all right, okay. I'm going to read these two verses to you and tell me if this doesn't sound like a math word problem. Okay, the disciples, they haven't landed, right? They're in the middle of the lake, and they can't go back, and they're not where they're supposed to be, and Jesus seizes this opportunity to help them to get clear. Now, I'm going to read it. Tell me if this doesn't sound like a math word problem. Ready? Here we go. Verse 19, if you're reading along at home. And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said to him, 12? And Jesus is like, that's right. Let's go to the bonus round. Question number 2. Verse 20, kids. Here we go. And when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said to him, 7? And always at this point in the story, I imagine Jesus going, he's waiting for the light to go on. He's trying to get these guys to connect the dots. He's like, and they're like, 12, 7, 12. There's a little with the 12. And Jesus keeps going. You know what he was trying to get these guys to see? That it wasn't the bread that fed those people. It was him. He was trying. Well, listen to the first 3 words of verse 19. When I broke. He's talking about himself. Listen to the first 3 words of verse 20. When I broke. He says, guys, the first time you had an unmet need and you brought it to me and you let me handle it, what happened? They said, well, you met the need and we had leftovers. And he says, that's right. And he said the second time you ran into a situation where you had a whole lot more problems and you had resources to meet it. And instead of you trying to do what you thought was best and just kind of going through the motions, you brought it to me. You leaned into your relationship with me and you brought me your unmet needs. What happened? And they said, you took what little we had and you multiplied it and we had leftovers. He says, that's right. He's trying to get these guys to see that he's the bread. He's the bread. Because in the big picture of things, it's the presence that leads to provision. See, we think, well, God must not be real because I'm not being provided for. We got it in reverse. It's presence that leads to provision. These guys were trying to figure out how they were going to provide for themselves. Where are we going to get enough bread? And Jesus says, I'm in the boat with you. It's presence before provision. Why didn't he just multiply the bread? He's already done it twice by his own reminder. He said, the first time when the 5 loaves and the 5,000, how many basketful? And the second time when I broke the 7 for the 4,000. He's done it twice. Why didn't he just snatch the bread out of their hands and go, kee, 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 and by the time they landed, they would have had a boatload full of bread. Why didn't he just do that? Because he was trying to get them to see something deeper. And any time we live through long seasons of unmet needs, long seasons where your prayers aren't being answered, long seasons where it seems like God's not listening, long seasons where you think of disappointment and you think this is not working and when is this ever going to end? Anytime we live through long seasons where there seemingly is little provision, it's because God is doing something. It's not punishment. It's not because you're a bad person or he has something against you. Jesus was trying to get these guys not to look at his hands, but at his face. It's presence before provision. And he was trying to get these guys to go, wait a minute. At the end of the boat, there's Jesus. There sits Jesus in my boat. There sits the bread of life. And the only way sometimes we can see it is to remember how he's worked. I bet I could point to any row in this auditorium and people would have a God faithfulness story. You'd have some moment in your life where God was faithful to you. That you could stand up and go, I had this, I trusted God, he got me through it. I went through this, I didn't have enough, and somehow God made a way. And Jesus says to these guys, think back. Think back when you saw me provide for the multitudes. Think back when I took a little and I made a lot out of it. And let it lead you to the point that you see that he's the bread. The bread's not the bread. Jesus is the bread. Jesus is the bread. He's the bread. And the bread of life is in the boat with you. What you had to wake up to this morning that drained the courage out of you, Jesus is in that boat. What you felt when you drove to church today, Jesus is in your boat. And like the disciples, he's drawing us to a place where we would recognize him as the bread. You know, when I think about these two stories that Jesus referenced, when he says the first time I fed the 5,000 and the second time that for the 4,000, in both of those stories, there were moments where the disciples scurried through the crowd. They came up with a few loaves of bread and they brought what little they got and they dropped it into his hands. I always think about that moment. I bet you've read this story before, you didn't even think about it, but there was this moment where Jesus has his hands out and the disciples take those little bread fragments and they drop it into the hands of Jesus. It rolls out of their hands and off the tips of their finger into the palms of the hands of Jesus. Jesus, we got a little bread. We got a little resource and a whole lot of problems. We got a whole lot of struggles and a little bit that we're clued in about. And that we would take our unmet needs, let them roll out of our hands into the hands of Jesus. So this is what I want to do this morning is I want to lead us in a simple prayer response to do that. So I'm going to ask everyone if you would just to stand up for a minute. I'm going to ask you to stand up. I'm going to ask you to take your hands and make a little cup out of them just like this. There's some of us in this room that you would have to say, man, I've never, when you talk about relationship with Jesus, I've never had an experience with his presence. I had no sense of peace between Jesus and I. You might have to say, I feel like I maybe lived more as a religious believer or more like a cultural Christian. Then this morning, if that describes you, I want you to picture a heart right there in your hands. Because what it means to enter into a relationship with Jesus is that you give him the core, the heart of your life. So for every student, every adult that maybe you've never ever done that, I want you to picture a heart right there in your hands. And what you're going to do is you're going to give him your life. And those watching at home, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing, to cup your hands together this morning and do this. This is an exercise, a prayer exercise you can do anywhere. It works here and it works at home. Those of us that are facing unmet needs, I want you to picture that unmet need right there in your hands. If it's you and someone else, picture that situation. If it's financial, if it's emotional or physical, if it's something personal, depression, anxiety, anger, doubt, despair, worry, I want you to picture that, you holding all that right there in your hands. Just hold it right there. if it's medical, if it's job related, and you feel like throughout the week I can hardly breathe. When I think about it, I can hardly breathe. I want you to picture it right there in your hands. And what we're going to do this morning with our prayer and with our hands is to place those things in the hands of Jesus. Imagine in just a moment when you lift your hands up, you releasing those bread issues, you releasing the unmet needs of your life. And Jesus scooping his hands down and lifting that up and going, I got it. I got it. It'll give you a sense of peace and a sense of calmness in the midst of storms. So I'm just going to lead us in a simple prayer based on Mark 8. When I get done praying, I'm just going to count to 3. I'm going to ask everybody to lift their hands up as a way of saying, Jesus, I place it in your hands. You got it. Jesus, you got it. You are both my bread and my boat. You are my source of provision, and you are in the boat with me. You're both the presence in the boat and the provision of the bread. You're both presence and provision. And see if this morning as we pray this prayer, you can't sense God lift that off of you. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, for those of us holding our hearts in our hand, we give our life to you. We ask you to step in our boat and be the Lord of everything in our life, all the contents of our boat. Just tell him, if you're holding your heart, just say, Jesus, I believe and I receive you as the Lord of my boat. Just tell him, I believe and I receive you as the Lord of my boat. Let him step in. If you're holding an unmet need in your life, Jesus can see it this morning. Would you pray this with me? Would you just say, Dear Jesus, you know what I'm holding in front of you. And I believe that you are the bread of my life. I can't fix it. I don't have enough. But what little I have, I give it to you. I trust you today to be present with me and to be the bread of my life. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Just lift your hands above your head. Let that lift off of you. Let the weight and the concern of that situation lift off of you. Depression and anxiety and doubt, fear, worry, panic. Let it lift off of you. See if you can sense Jesus reaching down and taking it right out of your hands this morning. And hear the Spirit of God saying to you this morning, I got this. I got this. With your kids, he says, I got this. With your life, I got it. With your finances, I got it.